did you know that up to 45% of all dementia, including Alzheimer's, 75% or so of strokes, and at least 35% of depression can be prevented by things you can do every day in your life?
Hey, everybody. We've had some of the most incredible guests coming to you these past couple of months. The amount of expertise and knowledge on these cutting edge topics is something we really hope that you enjoy. And if you do, it would make a huge difference to us if you could rate, review, and subscribe the podcast. It helps us to get more guests, better experts, and talk about all of the things that are really important to you. So give us a love, give us a lot of love, and don't forget to subscribe so you get all our new episodes. Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Rachel, and I have an incredibly important, very special guest for you today. Today is our everything you need to know about brain health with Dr. Jonathan Rosand. Dr. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us today. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I am so excited to get the opportunity to talk to you.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to partner with you and your team.
And you are a fellow masshole, are you not?
I am. Well, I haven't lived in Massachusetts all my life, but yes, I am. I am
We'll
a
accept
masshole, I
you.
guess.
We'll accept you. Listen, if
Yeah.
you're working, are you at Mass General?
I'm at Mass General in Boston. Yes. So
Then
it's
you're
a
fully accepted into the clan. That is great work. Jonathan is a physician, scientist, educator, and a social entrepreneur. You have created an amazing multidisciplinary team that is successfully tackling some of the most pressing challenges in brain disease right now. And I am so bowled over and incredibly impressed by your work because it is largely based in prevention. And in 2024, you launched the Global Brain Care Coalition. Tell us a little bit about your work in brain disease prevention and why you decided to go down this road.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. Um, so I'm a neurologist, but within neurology, my specialty is what's called neurocritical care and stroke as well. And those two specialties deal with sudden emergencies. And in neurocritical care, we deal with the worst of the worst: head injuries, spinal cord injuries, peripheral nervous system dysfunction. And for many years, I ran the neuro ICU at Mass General Hospital and was chief of what is called the Division of Neurocritical Care. And in that capacity, and I continue to do this, I continue to take care of patients in the ICU and follow those who survive and care for them in the outpatient setting, along with their family members and partners. And so it was really as an intensivist that I began to appreciate the extraordinary opportunity for prevention. So about more than 10 years ago now, um, I noticed that my patients and their partners who survived the ICU were developing anxiety, depression, or PTSD at very high rates. And what was striking was that these were all folks who really didn't have a history of these conditions before whatever landed them in the ICU. So, we had the hypothesis that there was something about, the sudden illness, the sudden injury, and the ICU stay that was the risk factor, if you will. So I recruited a talented psychologist to the ICU to help us develop very basic, what we call interventions, to administer to patients and their caregivers. So it had to be both, what we call the dyad, in the ICU. And these weren't medicines. These were some amount of education. So helping people to understand what to expect, what had happened to them. training in mindfulness, and then skills building around managing time, managing stress. And what we found was that those individuals, I should say those pairs who received this intervention in the ICU had much lower rates of anxiety, depression, and PTSD 6 months later. So this is now a national clinical trial, but the model was very clear to me. And that is that if you can convey to people at some point when they're ready to listen what they could use, information they can use, it gives them so much of an advantage over their healthcare, their outlook. And that's really how I got into prevention. You know, my background is I'm a geneticist. So I grew up when the Human Genome Project was just sort of beginning to flourish. And so I got in not on the ground floor of the Human Genome Project, but on the ground floor of the next stage, you know, what to do with all the knowledge generated from the Human Genome Project. And so we did wonderful work discovering genes for stroke and then working out how some of those genes might influence risk of stroke. But it was clear to me that that work would take years to decades to have an effect on the patients in front of me. And I wanted something that was more, more immediate. So that's how I got to prevention.
So I just have to take a full stop and a hats off for all physicians who are practicing whole health. The fact that you pioneered this study looking at, this whole health approach for people who landed themselves in the ICU, but really looking at what they were going to look like after their acute injury and what their life was going to be like after that. I feel like a lot of people, patients, um, feel like that is really rare to have a whole health approach. And I just want to stop and recognize the people in the field that are doing these types of revolutionary work, because I think that patients everywhere are so excited to be treated as a whole human, rather than sort of the one thing that maybe landed them in a medical catastrophe. But there's so much more after that. So I'm just a full stop for that. Thank you so much. Um, you have been quoted as saying, take care of your brain and the rest of your body will follow.
Yes.
Do you feel that many people who are health aware, health conscious, trying to make positive progress with their health, do you feel they're doing enough with their brain health?
Well, let's unpack that because I think um, each of us has to choose for ourselves what we're going to do to take good care of ourselves. And I think, again, one of the nice messages that your site and your brand offers is it's really up to you. And that's where we like to start. Uh, I just want to take a pause and help people understand what an ICU is, because I think none of this could have happened, at least from my perspective, unless I had been an intensivist. ICUs in this country, for sure, but in countries around the world, are among the best resourced health facilities there are. And so we have the luxury of time. If I forget to examine something on a patient, I can walk back an hour later. Patient, unfortunately, isn't going anywhere. If I would like to talk to the family member of a patient and they're not there at 9:30 in the morning, but they come in at 4:30 in the afternoon, I'm there. Um, if we need to take more time to discuss what's going on with a particular patient than we are scheduled to do, that's no problem because we're all there. The other piece of the ICU is it's very straightforward to recruit consultants from all fields to come to the unit. Everybody comes to the patient. How when do we experience healthcare like that, where we're the center of
Yes.
attention? Usually we have to travel, and the doctors have a hard time talking to one another. Well, then in the ICU, all of that is flipped on its head. So it allows us to be very patient and family centric and to be creative in thinking about solutions. So I hope none of you or listeners ever have to be in an ICU, but odds are some of them will, either as patients or as family members. Um, Take a pause when you're there and appreciate that you have the nurse to talk to, probably a team of doctors, therapists, nutritionists, psychologists, social workers, the list goes on. And so it's in that environment that I think we can really provide whole health and then ask ourselves, how can we continue that whole person, whole family approach um, for the rest of the patient's life? Now, it's not as easy as having an ICU team follow you for the rest of your life. Um, and where I want to go, I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but you went to the question, if you take care of your brain and your body will follow. I think that was the quotation. Um, so to unpack all of that, I think it first has to start with how we became focused on preventing brain diseases and in particular dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke, and depression. So I'll do the test with you. So have you or your partner, if you have a partner, had a close personal experience with dementia, Alzheimer's, or stroke?
Yes.
Yeah. So it turns out you're among three-quarters of the adult population in the United States and frankly across the world. If I add in depression, that adds up essentially to everybody.
Yes.
So, so the first thing that we did, and when we decided to embark on this mission, was to figure out how common was it for individuals to experience these very difficult conditions. And when we learned it was that high, what became clear to me is that this was a way in. Because if you have watched someone you care about develop one of these conditions, it's hard. You watch the person you care about lose their dignity, and you never want that for them for sure. And most people will tell me, it's not that I'm so afraid of getting dementia, although I don't want to get it. It's that I don't want to put my family through my getting dementia. So that's a way to stop each of us in our tracks and say, this is something we share. This is a fear we share. This is essentially the human condition. And then I come back and I say, did you know that up to 45% of all dementia, including Alzheimer's, 75% or so of strokes, and at least 35% of depression can be prevented by things you can do every day in your life. So now I've got you, right? You're like, what is that? What is it? And so we set out to answer that question. What are these things? And make sure that we could convey the answers in a way that would make sense to people so that when you walk away with the answers, you can actually make that change in your life that you choose to make today. And it's easy to keep it going. It turned out figuring out how to communicate those changes was not straightforward because we doctors think we can just lecture our patients and our patients will walk out of the office and they'll be they'll just go and they'll change their diets and they'll start exercising and, everything is hunky dory. I mean, I don't want to disparage doctors. Most doctors are aware that that's not what happens, but we don't know what else to do. So we spent many years working with patients and families and doctors and nurses to figure out how best to communicate the state of the art science on prevention. And we came up with this tool called the Brain Care Score. And the Brain Care Score is essentially, it's a guide. It's a guide that anybody can use to pick where to start. And that's what we've learned. It's giving control. Each one of us needs to have control over what we do every day. It's our choice. And I don't know you have a unique routine That's going to be different from your sisters. That's going to be different from, your friends, from your children's, from your grandparents, etc. And so only you can decide where to start. So the brain care score is this tool that we came up with. And I think I just want to stop there because um, that really is about the focus on each of us as being the locus of control. That's what I think prevention is about.
So beautifully said, so empowering, first of all, because in in my view, so much of brain health in the past has been put forward as sort of a genetic condition. And I have always thought about the conditions of Alzheimer's, dementia, even getting into stroke and depression as highly genetic, lottery type of conditions that are, sucks if it's in your family, because if it is, there's really not much you can do. And I am so refreshed. Can you say those stats again? With the fact of that uh, we maybe are not so much a product of just this lottery of genetics, because that's mind blowing to me.
Well, 40 to 45% of all dementias, including Alzheimer's, at least 75% of strokes, and at least 35% of all depression are attributed to factors that each of us can modify on a daily basis. Yeah.
I
Um,
just am so empowered by that because yeah, I just think in the past, it really has been you watch your grandparents or your parents go down this path and you say, like, man, there's so little that I can do if this is in my family. And flipping that script is so exciting.
So you already know we make the best workout gear, but one of our best products, our highest rated product on our website is actually our collagen. If you have not heard about Glow Up by CVG, you are missing out. There is almost 700 five-star reviews on this product because it is such an amazing supplement. Actually, looking at it today, there are only 2 one-stars that were meant to be 5 stars. They love the product, they hit the wrong amount of stars. This is one of our most popular products for a reason. It dissolves like no other collagen. It's type 1 and 3. You're gonna have healthier skin, better joint mobility. Everything about this collagen makes it easy to put into your daily routine. So if you haven't tried Glow Up, get on cvg.com and make sure to add it to cart today. It's our best product.
I want to give you a chance to talk about the brain care score a little bit. I took the quiz. Um, I thought it was both brilliant and simplistic in the same package. Um, and I want you to talk about who should be taking this quiz, why they should be taking it, and sort of what we're looking for as an outcome.
well, let me first. You've packed in so much into what you just said that I want to make sure that we unpack all of the topics for your audience because we are convinced that through the approach that we've called brain care and through this global coalition now that is aiming to bring brain care to every community everywhere in the world and then measure the reduction in rates of dementia, stroke, and depression in the process to make sure we're on the right track. We've learned a lot of important lessons, and you've covered topics in your question that I think are important for me to just highlight. So I'm going to get to the score because I think it's really important. Who should take it? But before we go there, I want to talk about brain health and brain care. So when we were creating this tool, which is ultimately was the brain care score. Um, One of the things that we learned is that brain health is a term that's very confusing and stigmatizing. And I'll give you some examples. I have a lot of patients who've recovered from a stroke. So I have had a very poignant question from the partner of somebody who'd recovered from a stroke. Doctor, you said that when my partner had a stroke, a part of his brain had died and would never come back. And I said, yeah, that's true. So does that mean his brain will never be as healthy as mine? So the answer, I mean, there's no way to be honest and say, no, it doesn't mean that. But by the same token, just because a person's had a stroke doesn't mean that they can't recover everything and they can't lead an incredibly fulfilling and sometimes, frankly, more fulfilling life than they had before the stroke. So the last thing we want to do is label somebody as unhealthy. So that was an important first lesson. But another equally important lesson was when I was asked by the parent of someone with schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is a chronic mental condition that we think of as something that has no cure. And so people have to live with it. And it can be very, very disabling. Um, and this mother asked if, when she heard about when I talked about brain health with her, she asked, well, does that mean that my son's brain will be unhealthy for the rest of his life? And once again, what a sort of prison sentence to offer, right? So we knew that we had to get out of that discussion. And that's when we turned to care. Care is what can I do to take good care of my brain so that I don't end up like my mother? What can I do to take good care of my brain so that I reduce my risk of XYZ? What can I do to take good care of my brain so that it allows me to live the fullest possible life or live to see my grandchildren? All of these questions. And so the nice thing about brain care is it doesn't matter whether you've had a stroke. It doesn't matter whether you have schizophrenia. You can take as good care of your brain as the next person. And so that's how we flipped that script. And it was such a fundamental change because it was like opening up, suddenly we saw the world in color because now we saw, oh, right, our goal is to help people figure out what they can do for themselves. So that's the first thing. So I hope that the listeners of this podcast will really think twice about how they use the term brain health going forward and really focus instead on brain care. So the next point, and you should interrupt me if I go on too long because I could talk about this stuff forever. The next point I want to turn to is genetics. So, right, we are a product of the genes that we've inherited from our parents. And that's true. I mean, the genetic code, our DNA is like the instruction manual for all of our body parts and all of the cells in our body and all of the ways in which our organs talk to each other, et cetera. But what we certainly know is that our environment and our choices modify how that instruction book is read time and again. And so just to reassure you, we've done studies to look at the brain care score, and people who have high brain care scores can really blunt the effect of the genetics of the genes that they've inherited from their parents. So I think it's always important to understand that just because you've inherited particular, what we call genetic variants, doesn't mean that you don't still have control. So it's really important to recognize that. So then, um, I wanted to talk a little bit about, take care of your brain and your body will follow, or whatever it was that the quote that I said once upon a time. So when we first published the brain care score in the very end of 2023, we showed that it was a higher brain care score was associated with a substantially lower risk of dementia, of stroke, and depression over the next 12 years. We then replicated those studies in lots of different groups. And then we began to look at other conditions, heart disease, uh, lung cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer. And the relationship was the same. Raise your brain care score and your risk of all those conditions goes down. So the body just isn't that complicated. We've accomplished so much. We've learned so much about the biology of how we work and how we're put together and how each organ works. But a key lesson is that our organs benefit from the same kinds of lifestyle intervention. So that's what I mean when I say take care of your brain and the rest will follow. Um, so now the question is, who should take the brain care score? I think you asked that, right? We developed the brain care score with adults, um, and really motivated by reducing your risk of dementia, stroke, and depression. But what we've learned in using the brain care score with patients is that it's much more than just a score. It's an approach to driving your healthcare. It lays the choices out for you on how to get started. It forces you to think for yourself about what works for me. So it really helps you discover your own agency. It's a communication tool between you and your doctor. And so the best analogy is it's like driver's ed. You learn to be the driver of your own healthcare through using the brain care score. So we think that the brain care score is appropriate for any adult. And frankly, adolescents are often very interested in it because they're so focused on their mental health right now
Yes.
that they're looking for simple tools. But it's really been designed for adults. We plan to extend it to adolescents, and we believe that in the future, even grade school children will benefit from something like this because, grade school children now are thinking about their brains. We know all about, different learning types. And I mean, they know all about, they hear about the different ways they learn. They're exposed to learning differences and neurodiversity from a young age. And now children and parents have a vocabulary to describe behaviors in, their friends that they didn't have a generation ago. So we believe that the brain is something that from early on we're thinking about a lot. And we've been taught, everybody thinks about the effects of screens on their brains. I can tell you when I talk to young children, I talk to adolescents, I talk to, young adults, it's one of the first questions I get. That's a brain question for sure. So, so going back to this driver's ed analogy, it's amazing how safe the roads are, frankly, in the world. We basically give you formal training once when you're like 16, 17, 18, right? We test you, you pass, and then we set you free. And essentially every 5 years, you take an eye test and you get a license renewal. We don't expect you to take another refresher course. And it's amazing how safe the roads are. I mean, it's just remarkable. I think it's amazing and successful because we've come up with a system of road signs that even if you see one for the first time, most of us have the background to be able to interpret them. The way in which cars are designed, you learn if if you learn to drive in Florida and you drive on snow for the first time, you might slip, but you learn, right? There's something about the way we learn. So why can't healthcare be that way? And that's the vision we have with the brain care score. So going back to your question, who should take it? I think any adult who's motivated to take it should take it. And I ask all my patients to share it with their families and their loved ones. The goal is to share it widely. We all, we went through a pandemic recently where we all had to take on a new job, whether it was, remote care for an elderly relative who we couldn't see, or homeschooling our children, or, being an essential worker, whatever. If we look at this as a pandemic of dementia, stroke, and depression that dwarfs the impact of COVID-19, well, yeah, we have new jobs to do. So let's figure it out. use the brain care score.
I love so much of this empowering kind of you can do it, like you can take control of these kind of things and you can arm yourself with this knowledge of your own health and how it fits into your lifestyle and bring it to your healthcare providers. It's so patient first and I think that this is what every patient hopes for their healthcare is that, they can arm themselves with the knowledge to take better care of themselves. And one of the things that I really loved about taking the quiz was it was extremely all encompassing. I want people to know before they go in, there is some background knowledge that you need to kind of come with regards to physical components. Um, and I want to give you a chance to talk to people about, what they could come into the quiz with as far as physical components. But what I loved also was that it was not just blood work scores. It was not just some of these sort of more traditional medicine markers. It also included lifestyle components and social emotional components. I think people, think of the brain as a sort of separate entity. They think of their muscles as something they can improve. I can build my muscles, I can change them. It doesn't matter if I'm 40, I can start an exercise program and get fitter right now. But sometimes we think of the brain as sort of an unchanging. Um, so I want to first let you talk about what do we need to have prepared before we come in to take the brain score? And as far as like the physical kind of markers. And then I want you to also talk about how those lifestyle and social emotional components factor in to that score and how they are equally as important as, say, your blood pressure.
Um, well, the first thing to know is that we ask you for your blood pressure. So it's any any adult really should know their blood pressure. It's such a helpful number to have, and there's a lot more high blood pressure out there than is diagnosed. So the sooner you know it, the better. Uh, we ask that you have a cholesterol level and either a blood sugar or a hemoglobin A1C measurement. Now, we've recognized that having these measures is an impediment for somebody, pulling down the brain care score from the web and filling it out. So we've come up with a new version that will actually not require you to know these answers in order to complete the test. Because that's our goal is to get folks to take the test and use it. Maybe
Yes.
take it again in a few weeks or months. So just so your listeners can know, there will be a new version within the next, I would say, 2 months available,
That's
where
so
you don't get
great.
hung up on that. We listen to our patients. At this
Yes.
point, close to, I would say, around the world, probably 400,000 people have taken the brain care score. We want to get up, that number up way higher. And we know that it is much higher, but there are a lot of places where the brain care score is available that don't record any data. So we don't know how many people have taken it. For example, the version that exists in the New York Times has been used by millions, but we don't know beyond that. We don't know much. But going back to, so those are the three measurements that the current version of the brain care score asks you to have in advance. I would advise anybody who doesn't have them, don't worry about it because it's the perfect thing to take to your doctor to get those measures done. So if it gets you into the doctor's office, what a great outcome. There's a lot on the brain care score that doesn't require any measurements. Um, so let's talk about social emotional factors. Our goal with the brain care score was to create something boring. We want something that nobody will look at and say, well, that's not proven or this is not proven. One example I like to give, I'm a big fan of meditation. I really do believe that meditation, in whatever way you practice, so long as it's regular, reduces your risk of all these chronic diseases. But the science isn't there yet. So we felt that we would do better not to include meditation on the brain care score, because the last thing we wanted is for somebody to have their brain care score questioned by a skeptical friend, relative, you name it. We want your primary care doctor, when they see the brain care score, to say, yeah, there's nothing new here. Everybody knows this. So going back to the social emotional, you mentioned how, if you work out, you can strengthen your muscles. That's even when we're 40, 50, 60, we learn that we've got to keep working out to maintain our muscles, right? Well, our brain is even more plastic, as we say, changeable than our muscles. So let's say you decide at the age of 50 to learn a new language, you're actually changing your brain structure by learning. That's how you remember things. It's all in a change in the connection between neurons. And so I think it's really important for each of us to recognize that there is no limit to how your brain can change. And the most powerful way to change your brain is through the choices, the behaviors you choose every day. Um, there have been so many studies now of people who um, have been playing the piano for decades. Their brains are very different in particular ways from people who don't play the piano. And it's not because of their genes, it's because they've been playing the piano every day for so many minutes or hours. So it's helpful for each of us to remember that you really can change your brain. And of course, it's complicated because it's your brain that's choosing to do what changes the brain. But you can. You can.
Neuroplasticity is a new thing for me. I have been looking into brain health a lot. I have a neurodivergent son, and so I've been learning more than I ever would have normally, I think, about neuroplasticity. And why is okay? We all agree that it's easier. I don't know. Let's air bunnies that easier for a child to acquire a new skill. The younger they are, it seems like the younger your brain is, the more likely it is to acquire new skills at an easier rate. Let's also put that in air bunnies. But if the brain has this neuroplasticity that we are talking about, and if it is able to change at any age, why is it harder or seemingly harder when we're older? And is that the reason many people kind of feel like, well, this is a brain I'm stuck with. I can't learn a new skill. I can't learn to play the piano at 50. That would be way too hard. My brain just can't do stuff like that anymore.
Well, there's no question that the young brain is much more plastic, so to speak, than the older brain. Yes, that's true. And so somebody who is young will generally have an easier time learning new skills and retaining new skills than somebody who's older. The other thing we have to remember is it's more than just neuroplasticity. It's also, the body itself. There's a reason why you don't see a lot of really talented Major League Baseball hitters in their 40s, um, or, even their mid 30s. There's something about the brain of 20-year-olds and the coordination that really is peak performance. So if we set ourselves up to learn a skill to become a concert pianist at the age of 40, if you start at 45, you want to be a concert pianist, that's probably setting yourself up for a disappointment. But if your aspiration is to become a damn good pianist who derives enormous pleasure from playing the piano, far better than you ever could have, then that's very realistic. So that's part of it. We want to make sure we're setting expectations properly. But the other piece is motivation, right? We really have we get so many messages from society that inevitably psych us out. So I'll give you one example that just happens in my practice all the time. People will come to see me about, you know, brain care and prevention, and often, not often, but someone will come in and say, "I know I need to lose weight. Every doctor I see tells me to lose weight. I don't want to talk about my weight." So, aha, that's a lesson to me. I know what we're not going to talk about today. The good news is the brain care score has 12 components. You can start anywhere, and it doesn't really matter where you earn your points. You still get the benefit of raising your score and reducing your risk. Um, but what I've learned from that brief interaction is what's the specific experience that this person has had, probably being shamed in doctor's offices time and again. And being shamed is a very common experience for all of us. And so that's a perfect way to set ourselves up to be trapped. Because if you've been conditioned to walk into the doctor's office expecting to be shamed for having a weight issue, you're sort of stuck giving up from the get-go. So the trick with learning new things as we grow older is to hear that voice in the back of our heads and understand that we don't have to listen to it. And my hope is that the brain care score helps people ignore that voice just a touch so that they can get started on something.
That's such a great point. I think, so often we get hung up on the one thing that we're not doing, or that we feel that we're failing at, or that we feel isn't running at optimal. But there are so many components to a good, quote unquote, good or better brain care score that we are still benefiting. I'm so glad you said that. We are still benefiting from the stress management, the social relationships, the meaning in your life. Those are equally as important as, say, your GLP-1 score. So like, or your GLP score. So like, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because we tend to hone in on that one area and say like, this is the reason that I shouldn't even bother trying, right? But it's it's a small piece, and I did find when I took the test, the quiz, that um one of the major things that I was hung up on was that my nutrition score wasn't what I thought it should be. And that surprised me. The I think thinking that that was kind of the thing that brought down my score was a little eye-opening, and in a good way, to try to sort of challenge me to get those 2 servings in every meal of fruits and vegetables, and, thinking about that and having that be more front in my mind, but, not letting that diminish the other parts of the quiz that I felt like, man, I did really well on this, and this is a good way to continue to prevent future issues, by keeping this area of my life high.
One of the things that I'm glad you brought up, the nutrition, the diet component. I'm very dissatisfied with it. It's very hard to communicate sort of what is the best healthy diet, right? We all live different lives. The studies are compelling about certain things like fruits and vegetables, all in, especially vegetables, especially green vegetables. Like there's no way that it's almost like you can't eat too many. We know that high salt is something to avoid, but it's very hard to regulate your salt intake. I mean, if you eat out, your salt intake skyrockets.
Yeah.
That's how so much restaurant food is flavored. So really creating a scenario where people feel pressure around salt if they have a lifestyle where they have to eat out That's that could make life challenging. So we want to be thoughtful about things like that. Um, there's also a lot of debate over what is adequate protein intake on a daily basis. And I think you've had a
So true.
guest on this podcast, and I don't know how recently, but there's a fad right now about taking in huge amounts of daily protein. And if that's important to you, I don't want the brain care score to upset that in the sense that you have to. I want it to all be you decide when you're ready to take something on. I think that's the only way that this becomes your personal score. And then it's like that driver's ed where you just take it through life with you.
Right.
Um, incidentally, I have a really, this has come up a few times, when a patient of mine who's used the brain care score has come down with a new diagnosis. In this case, it was rheumatoid arthritis. She came in one day and said, I want to make a rheumatoid arthritis care score. I want to create a score just like the brain care score that will, keep my rheumatoid arthritis in check. And, I'm not a rheumatologist, so I don't have the expertise. I encouraged her to do it with a rheumatologist. She went home, did it herself, brought it to a rheumatologist, and now has a care score for that. And it was so gratifying to me because
Yes.
this is the point. We want to help people see what it means to be the driver of your healthcare. It really is about how to make it work for me. Um, and that's where the social connections come into play. So the brain, I mean, how great is it that if you spend more time with friends, you can also have the experience that you're improving your brain care score?
You just
Isn't that
listen,
amazing?
it's more girls' nights out is all I'm hearing. I
Yeah,
just
exactly. And also more relationships where you feel like you can trust each other. I
yeah.
think that, that's not in the brain care score explicitly, but I want to emphasize that. It's so important to have these social relationships where you could call someone up if you needed help and you could maybe show your more vulnerable side to them. That's where I think the core benefit comes from. It's those connections. And not all of us can have them. So, still going to the bar and just chatting with people at the bar on a regular basis, that's great. And you get full points for that.
That was definitely a full stop for me when I was doing the quiz. The people that you would call and trust that aren't your children or your spouse, because I
Hmm.
think that there are certain points in our life where we get our world gets a little bit smaller, and we think that that is sort of enough, relying on our spouse or our children. And we kind of like assume that that is a healthy social, emotional state for our brain. But that definitely gave me full pause. Other than people, other than the very small group that you've surrounded yourself with. So I think that that's a really good reminder, for people that this has to be so robust. It doesn't have to be. Nothing has to be anything. But it
Right.
is
Good
helpful.
catch.
It is helpful to
Yeah.
have a really robust circle of true people you can truly rely on and you can truly trust.
Hey, you.
Thanks for getting in touch with the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast.
We love your questions and adore hearing from you.
Leave us a hello,
A burning question,
feedback.
or anything else you want to share with us on the podcast.
We will play your message live on air if we can.
Thanks for being an amazing friend. Stay safe and moving.
I want to end with what can we do? Because the reason why I love your work so much and all the things that you're doing is that these are things that we can do today, right now, this hour. And that feels, we don't have to research it to death. We don't have to become an expert on the topic. We don't have to revamp our whole entire life and throw everything we love out the window. It's not any of that. And what could we do today, all of us individually, to raise our brain care score? is there, one area or one thing that we can add in today that would make our brains healthier in the long run and reduce all of those areas that we are, looking to prevent?
I get a variant of that question often. Doctor, what should I do first? And the answer that I always give is, well, what's most appealing for you to start with?
Mm.
So I would say what we should all do is look at the brain care score, take the score, and decide where do you want to start. Um, the most important thing is y- y- you can't, none of us, even doctors, cannot be experts in all of the medicine and the science that is relevant to our healthcare. The only real area where we are experts is in ourselves. Nobody knows more about you than you or me than I do, or, our children than they do. And they're right when they say, you're not the boss of me. That's true. Remember. Um, and so, armed with that confidence that you know yourself best, the next logical step is you choose where to start. And what the brain care score offers is for you to point to that. I'm going to start here to your doctor. So then when you see your doctor again, you can talk about maybe you've taken a further step, or you can talk with your doctor about what might make sense to be the next step to take. But what we find is the most important first step has to be what you choose. Once you've had that experience of choosing for yourself, then the partnership with a doctor, I think, becomes much more equal, because you come to the relationship with some learning about yourself. The last thing I'll say is, if I were to choose, if I had a magic wand and I wanted to eliminate as many cases of dementia and stroke and Alzheimer's and depression as I could, and with a single wave of the wand, I would wave the wand to bring everybody's blood pressure across the country, across the world, into a normal range. Half of all Americans, roughly, with high blood pressure don't have it controlled into the normal range. There are so many good medicines and so many good ways to bring your blood pressure down. We just haven't figured out a good way to do it. One of the nice things about the brain care score is if you don't like meds, you can start with all the other things in the brain care score that lower your blood pressure, like sleep and social relationships and reducing stress and exercise and physical activity and diet. So it's all related. That's the wonderful thing about the score. You move one lever in the right direction and all the other levers will move too.
That is so cool. And the kind of healthcare that you're describing, I think, sounds utopia for so many people. The idea that I know myself best and that I am in the driver's seat, and that, like, this is, I don't know, I hope the future of healthcare, and the more
That's our
resources like
goal.
this. Yeah, the more, but the resources, I think, is and having them be accessible. The brain care score is accessible to literally anyone who wants to do it. And the questions are extremely accessible to anyone who wants to participate. And you talked about making them even more accessible by not, requiring certain numbers that people might not have access to offhand. So it's like, this is the future of healthcare. I think that you are at the forefront of something that everybody wants. And this prevention model behind it is just, it feeds the whole machine of, like you said, moving these levers in a way that works for you and watching just the improvements pile on top of each other. It's amazing.
Well, let me just tell you briefly about the Global Brain Care Coalition, because I think there are a lot of ways in which your listeners can participate if they would like. The coalition is this extraordinary community. We call it a virtual learning community, where we have community leaders and scientists and philanthropists and clinicians and some government officials. We have, associations like ARP and Us Against Alzheimer's. We all come together. The mission is to get brain care into communities, to have recruit champions in communities who want to figure out how best to integrate the brain care score and the brain care approach in their communities, to keep track of how communities do, to learn from communities what works and what doesn't, and then to actually, in the process, measure dementia, stroke, depression incidence, as we call it. So it's a grassroots movement. We have champions around the world, and it's really driven by the best science and also altruism. So it turns out that helping others, I mean, that's like the biggest meaning in life you get, right? So helping others, the satisfaction of helping others, is a great way to raise your brain care score and in the process prevent chronic disease. So it's all a big circle.
What a lovely, lovely way to end the podcast. That is just, I am so inspired by your work. I am so inspired by the idea that we are all today able to do something that can lower our risk for Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke, depression. These are plaguing diseases that we all, as you mentioned in the beginning, we all know someone or ourselves have been plagued with these diseases. And this kind of hope around these diagnoses is just, it feels very, very exciting. So I just want to once again thank you. Of course, we will have the link to the brain care quiz in our show notes. Please get out there and take it. Even if, as Dr. Jonathan said in the beginning, even if you're not sure on some of your more physical component scores, take it anyways. Take a guess, because it will really get you started. I know that I bought way more green leafy vegetables in this week's grocery trip, having taken the brain care score beforehand. So I want everybody to just get out there, give it a shot, take it, and get the ball rolling. Thank you so much for pioneering this work. It's amazing.
Well, it was such a pleasure, as you can probably tell, to be on this show with you. And the thanks really has to go with all of these patients and families who, insisted on correcting us when we got it wrong. And we listened. That's our accomplishment. We
That
listened
is
carefully.
the true testament to what an incredible physician you are, and the people that you've surrounded yourself with is the listening. The listening is what I think a lot of people have said has been missing, and you are out there doing that work. We will list all of the ways you can get in touch with Jonathan's work, with the brain care score itself. Everything will be in the show notes. And again, it's been such a pleasure, and it's so empowering and hopeful. And I hope everyone leaves this podcast with the same hope that I have for these debilitating diseases.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.